Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, roger, go for deploy.
Stich 2, and to everybody in the shuttle program, the crew is go for launch.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good morning and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. I'm Sandra Jones and we're here today to talk about the upcoming crewed flight test of the Boeing Starliner vehicle that will carry NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams to the International Space Station for a mission of up to 2 weeks in length. Joining us today to discuss this historic mission are leaders from both NASA and Boeing. So joining us today virtually is NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, Steve Stich, Commercial Crew Program Manager, Dana Weigel, Deputy Manager of the International Space Station Program, and Mark Nappi, Vice President and Program Manager for the Boeing Starliner program. We'll first start with some initial remarks from each of our briefers before we do open it up for questions both in the room and on our phone bridge. If you are dialed into our phone bridge, you can submit a question using *1. If you are on the phone and find that your question has already been answered, you can press *2 to withdraw it. So with that, I'll begin with some opening comments from Administrator Nelson.
Hey everybody. This is history in the making. We're now in the golden era of space exploration, and just think where we've come. First, Mercury. And I'm talking about human-rated spacecraft. Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, then the Space Shuttle, and now the Starliner. After, of course, Dragon. And so we have a backup. We have 2 spacecraft now to be able to get us into orbit. And, of course, that was the whole point when we started the Commercial Crew to Orbit program. This goes back to the new NASA legislation that said that we were going to have a government program, of which we always have, but concurrently, on a dual track, we were going to have a commercial program. And thus, through the Commercial Crew and Cargo program to orbit, we have been tremendously successful. And here we are with a brand new spacecraft that is human rated. Butch and Suni are doing this as a first. It's the first time that a crew will go on to this new spacecraft. So it's another one of those tremendously important historical markers in NASA's space program. This is the 6th rated, human-rated spacecraft. And so let's go NASA.
I'll hand it over to Steve Stich.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra, and it's great to be here today, and I want to thank you for your continued interest in the Commercial Crew program. As Administrator Nelson said, it's an exciting day to be here talking about our crewed flight test as we move into this next phase of preparations for the crewed flight test. Bringing along our second human rating vehicle in the period of 4 years has been a tremendous honor for our Commercial Crew team and a tremendous challenge of just getting through all the work to get these 2 spacecraft, Dragon and Starliner, flying. Right now, the team is extremely focused on the crewed flight test and doing all the final preparations for that mission. We are really excited to have this second transportation system up and available to us. This has really been our goal all along, is to have 2 dissimilar systems, Starliner and Dragon, and then fly them, once a year, every other year slots. We've seen in the past the importance, I think, of having this dissimilar redundancy. It's always tough to fly into space. There's always challenges with every launch vehicle and spacecraft, and so for us, having that second transportation system is hugely important to us. Mark's going to talk a little bit more about where we're at relative to the vehicle preparations. As I've mentioned before, Starliner's in the process of being fueled right now in preparation for launch, and then the Atlas vehicle over at Complex 41 is going through its final checkouts, and then eventually Starliner will go over and get mated to the launch vehicle. We'll talk a little bit more about where we're at. This year's been busy for Commercial Crew. We had an important parachute test around January 9th to test the final modifications to the Starliner system. That test went extremely well. We've got that data back from that test. We're in the middle of that final certification of the parachute system. In fact, we had a program control board earlier this week to talk about the structural margins for that system and the factor of safety, and it's all in great shape. So that's really good. The crew has been busy here, and you'll hear from them this afternoon. They've been training in the simulator. I think many of you got to go over the simulator yesterday and see what Starliner is like to go fly. Butch and Sonny have been training and getting ready for this flight for a number of years. The flight control team has been doing their final integrated simulations with the crew in preparation for flight, and that's going really well. Part of bringing on a new crewed system is the human rating process and our certification process, and we're really in the final cusp of that. We really only have a couple of areas to close out. That's going really well. We are in a better position than I think we've ever been for any flight that I've been a part of in terms of closing out that certification. The mission itself is extremely important to us. It's a crewed flight test, as we've talked about, and so if you remember, the importance of this test is to really test out all the Starliner systems. There'll be some manual flying objectives during the flight to test out the manual flying capability of this vehicle. We'll have the crew do a little flying as the Starliner approaches station on the V-bar and check out that system and make sure we can fly the vehicle. And then once we dock, we'll do some demonstrations with station to make sure it can fulfill all the requirements if needed to be a safe haven. And then, the importance of this flight really is, as I talked about for OFT2, OFT2 was really the path to the crewed flight test, and this crewed flight test is really the path to Starliner 1. And we've already started preparing for Starliner 1, working with Mark and his team. We've already started approving certification products for that flight. And really the goal is after CFT, after the crewed flight test, to look at the data from the flight and then have a certification activity toward the end of this year. Starliner 1 has a few improvements. One that I can talk about a little bit today is the ability to land in a little bit higher wind conditions, and we're looking at other improvements to the vehicle as well. The launch date right now is no earlier than May 1st, and that's driven by the ISS traffic. As you know, it's been a busy year on ISS. We have a cargo vehicle en route right now, and Dana will talk a little bit more about that mission and then how at the end of the undock time frame we have to set up for a crewed flight test. I do want to thank the entire NASA and Boeing team. We've been working side by side with Boeing for many years, and you can tell the excitement of our team in getting to the crewed flight test. The flying crew is extremely challenging, as we know from previous flights we've flown, but the team's really excited and working really hard. Can't thank the team enough, and I'll hand it over to Dana Weigel.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate all of the interest that we have here. We are really excited on the station side to get this first crewed Boeing Starliner mission up to the space station. As you've heard, it's important to the agency. It's also really important to ISS to have two different vehicles that we can launch from the U.S. Space station's really designed to be continuously crewed. And so there are any number of different contingencies that we could encounter where redundancy is really needed. And so it's always been our goal to have a handful of different vehicles that we can fly to get crew up there. So big major stepping stone for Boeing, for Commercial Crew Program, and also for Space Station. I would like to share with you some other current news with Space Station, but we would like to keep the rest of this briefing focused on the CFT mission. As you know, yesterday we had planned to launch the 71S Soyuz crew carrying NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson, a cosmonaut, and a Belarus spaceflight participant. At about 20 seconds before launch, there was an automated abort that was initiated that stopped the launch count. The crew was taken out of the Soyuz spacecraft and is awaiting their next opportunity to launch. Our Roscosmos colleagues have taken a look at the data, and they have determined that the issue is related to low voltage in part of the rocket's electrical power system. They're still working to troubleshoot and to understand it and to come up with resolution plans, so I don't yet have the answer for what they'll do to resolve it. In fact, there are meetings that are ongoing this morning, but we will share with you as soon as we have more information. For now, we're still holding a potential launch date for Saturday, March 23rd for the Soyuz, assuming this is a more simple fix, and then we've got backup opportunities on Sunday, Monday, and of course beyond that in the future if that's needed. So more to come there. Yesterday afternoon, we did have a successful launch of the SpaceX 30 cargo mission, carrying with it 6,200 pounds of resupply and research to station. That's planned to dock this Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m. Central Time. That's going to be a really, really busy mission for the crew on board. It's a little over 30 days long. Now, we plan for SpaceX 30 to undock at the end of April. And then a few days after that undocking, we'll have Crew 8 get in the Crew Dragon and do a relocation of their spacecraft from the current location, which is Harmony's forward port, to the Zenith port. That's going to free up the forward port, which is what we need for the CFT docking. I had a chance to go over to one of the recent simulations and watch Butch and Sunny and talk to them a bit, and they're in great spirits. They are ready and anxious to fly, both the Starliner vehicle and also anxious to get on board ISS. Once they get there, they'll be there for just under 2 weeks, and the main focus will be putting Starliner through its paces. They'll do a number of activities that I think you'll hear a lot more about in a lot of the other briefings, but some of the things they'll do are things that we will eventually need for the longer duration missions, such as housekeeping on the Starliner. They'll also, as Steve mentioned, do some of the procedures and preparations for what we call safe haven, or checking out the contingency preparations and procedures, including moving some of our emergency equipment around. So very busy time on board station, a lot of schedule in front of us to get to a CFT mission, but we will be ready, and we are very much looking forward to having the Starliner spacecraft there, along with Butch and Sunny. And with that, I will hand it over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Dana. Well, it's very exciting to be back in the launch environment and getting ready for a mission. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the why we're doing CFT, what we plan to accomplish. I'll talk to you about what we've been doing since the last time we talked with getting the spacecraft and all of the systems ready. And then I'll talk a little bit about the people before we wrap up. The CFT flight is really the introduction into crew into our vehicle system. So a lot of our flight test objectives are about how that interface is going to work. Most of the things in the flight test objectives that we're looking at we've got about just under 90 of them, and it's all, does the vehicle perform with the human in the loop as expected? And so as we go through the mission, I'll talk a little bit of detail about what those flight test objectives are, but as we go through the mission, that's what we'll be looking for. We flew OFT-2, and that was the uncrewed mission for the Starliner vehicle. It was very successful, but now we introduce the human. And so what are we going to do to establish that interface? Well, from pre-launch through ascent, we're going to be looking at how the astronauts fit into the seats, how they interface with the equipment in the vehicle, and there'll be specific things that we'll ask them to look at, and we'll get their feedback when we get back. When we go through approach and rendezvous and dock, we'll confirm the thruster performance and manual abort scenarios are working as expected. We'll check the communications, we'll check the manual and auto navigation systems, and the operation of the life support system with crew now in the vehicle. Once we're on dock, we'll look at hatch operations and how that works with the crew. And once we get past the first few days, we'll go into a quiescent mode and make sure that performs nominally. And then after that, it's about about cargo transfer. Dana talked a little bit about that and how that works between Starliner and ISS. Then we'll undock. We'll confirm our manual piloting system. We'll be able to go into the backup mode and let Butch and Sunny use the hand controllers to make sure the vehicle reacts as expected. And then the rest of it is just about how we separate from the crew module with the service module, and how we re-enter and use the parachute systems and test the landing systems out. So a lot of nominal operations, but this time the crew's involved, and so we want to check that interface out. CFT is a test flight, so we expect that there may be some lessons learned. There's, in our history, Steve and I and Dana all have worked through ISS and shuttle, and every single mission you learn something, and we expect the same from this. So we're looking forward to getting those flight test objectives done, getting back and bouncing those against OFT2, and then working towards our certification process. So secondly, you know, where is the vehicle? What have we been doing for the last 6 months? We have primarily been working on getting the vehicle, of course, ready for flight and solving the two issues that we had back in the summer, which were the parachute system and the tape flammability issue that we had. So we can safely say those issues are behind us. The parachute system, we had the soft link that we talked about that had failed some testing early on, and so we replaced that soft link with a more durable material. That's been completed. We took the opportunity, since we had the time, to basically upgrade the parachute to the next configuration, which was already planned for Starliner 1, and that just involved a minor change of adding a little bit of material around the radial area of the parachute and adding some additional stitching. That turned into the drop test that Steve talked about with the parachute. That test was phenomenal, performed just as expected, and so we have a good parachute system to fly the vehicle with. The tape issue, we went through the vehicle and we either removed, or we put barriers in place, or we proved that the area that had the tape wasn't susceptible to this issue. And so we removed nearly a mile of tape from the vehicle and mitigated about 85 to 90% of the areas that the tape is installed on the vehicle. We've closed all that paper, and we're ready to go fly. There's a handful of engineering products that Steve talked about that we're getting wrapped up, and they're all ready to be closed in the beginning or end of this month to the beginning of next month. So we really have nothing in front of us that's stopping us. As far as the vehicle goes, the spacecraft is closed out, the cargo's loaded, and we're in the middle of propellant loading right now. We'll wrap that up next week, and then we'll be in a position to roll to the ULA launch site around the 10th of April. We've been going through a number of reviews, which on the Boeing side have all been completed. There's a program management flight readiness review that we completed. There's a mission assurance review that we completed, and just this week we completed an executive review with our CEO and Chief Technical Officer to assure that we're ready to fly, and we've received concurrence from all those reviews to proceed. So we'll look forward to the next set of reviews, which will be with NASA. That'll lead up to the agency review at the end of April. Next, the people. I think we all have something in common here, that we're all excited about this, and our workforce, to say the least, is excited as well. We had the privilege of coming back after the holidays, and really we didn't have to hit the ground running. We started slowly, and we've built momentum up until this point, and we've always talked to the team about peaking at the right moment, and we're going to peak when it's time to execute this mission at the end of this month, the beginning of May. The crew, Steve and I meet with the crew every other week at a minimum, and we talk about what's on their minds. We talk about what's the status of the vehicle is and where we're headed, and we're in a really good spot right now with the crew. They're anxious to fly, we're anxious to fly, and we are all on the same page about what to expect. Working with NASA, of course, we're in lockstep, and we're working towards closing out all the paper that we talked about earlier. All in parallel with all this, we've been working towards getting Starliner 1 ready as well. So at the end of this year in November, we expect to get the certification review complete, and the vehicle will be complete and ready to go at the end of this year as well in December. And then when CFT gets back, we have to start preparing for Starliner 2. So we've already started working requirements and schedules so that when the vehicle gets back at the end of May, we'll be ready to hit the ground running and start that vehicle processing for Starliner 2. So a lot's been going on. We're excited about this mission. We're excited for Sonny and Butch to fly, and of course, we're looking forward to providing that second vehicle to NASA for crew rotations. Back to you, Sandra.
And thank you to all of our briefers for those initial remarks. We'll now open it up for questions. As a reminder, if you are on the phone bridge, you can press *1 to submit your question. Once your name is called, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you'd like to direct your question. And if your question has already been asked, you can press *2 to withdraw it. But let's start with some questions here in the room first. Go ahead.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News for Mark. Tell me about the amenities in the capsule for the crew. What kind of comfort level can they expect in the capsule on the ride up?
So the crew has been in the vehicle a number of times. We fit the seats for the crew, so they are very comfortable. You know, it is a tight quarters if you've been in a spacecraft before, so it's not like a motorhome, but but it serves the purpose for the short missions that we provide access to the International Space Station for.
Bill, and then.
Bill Harwood, CBS News for Steve. You know, watching the simulators yesterday and seeing the equipment down here and talking to the people, the impression I got anyway was how tightly integrated NASA Ops is with this Starliner project, and it seemed like more of that than we see with NASA and SpaceX. I realize you guys are tightly bonded with SpaceX as well, but can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, the Starliner looks more like a traditional NASA program to some of us than the Dragon, and maybe it's pros and cons of that approach, but it does seem to be more integrated, at least looking from the outside in. Can you just talk about that? Thanks.
Yeah, good question, Bill. We did, you know, sort of let either contractor choose the way that they wanted to operate, and so as long as they met our certification requirements, that was acceptable. SpaceX has chosen to fly the vehicle, right? They have a flight control team at Hawthorne, and so they have their employees fly the vehicle. Boeing chose a different approach, using NASA flight ops to go do that work and to run the mission for mission control. And of course, that team, I was a part of that team years ago on Space Shuttle, so they have a lot of heritage. So Boeing chose that team. We also offered to anybody that wanted to use that a couple of NASA GFE projects. That would be the NASA docking system, and so Boeing chose the NASA docking system on Starliner as well. And so what I've seen is, you know, the flight control team working with Boeing operates the vehicle very well. I would say the Starliner spacecraft looks a little bit more like a space shuttle compared to Dragon, meets all our requirements. It was designed by really Chris Ferguson and others with shuttle heritage, so the cockpit looks, if I get in that cockpit, it looks very similar to me compared to shuttle. I think there's an advantage for NASA to have our team working side by side with Boeing and doing flight operations, in the sense that if you think about the gap we've had from the end of shuttle to what we need for Artemis, it's allowed NASA to keep some of those critical flight operation skills, training the crews and then operating the vehicle for launch and landing phases and those critical phases of flight. So I see it as an advantage. There's two different systems, but two different ways of doing things. Both have their advantages. And it's really exciting to see some of my colleagues that I used to work with in Space Shuttle in the flight control room, and they're going to get to fly this vehicle very soon with Butch and Sonny, and that's pretty exciting to me. So.
Thank you. We have a few more questions here in the room that we'll take before we jump to the phone bridge. Go ahead.
Hey, Micah Maidenberg, Wall Street Journal. Good morning. I guess, Steve and Mark, at this point, how do you know your teams haven't missed something? You know, unanticipated issues have emerged a few times on this program. How confident are you that there won't be more, you know, heading into May 1st?
Yeah, I can start, and then we'll let Mark add. I mean, we have gone through every certification requirement except for a couple that aren't closed yet. One of those is parachutes, and that's just getting the final data and reviewing all the data. And so from my perspective so far, it seems like we've looked through everything. We've done, in many cases, independent analysis, which we do the same thing for Dragon relative to landing loads, abort performance, rendezvous and docking, all those sorts of things. And I would say in the time frame that we've had from last summer to now, we've really spent that time testing the flight software in a very integrated manner in the Boeing ASIL facility, which is a hardware software integration lab. And so we've had the crew over there. So we've done everything we can to make sure we're not missing things. I tend to ask a lot of questions. I'm kind of more of a hands-on, I would say, program manager, maybe a little bit of an engineer at heart. And so I try to probe into areas to make sure that we haven't missed something. The last parachute test gave us a heck of a lot of confidence in that system. We had more instrumentation, I would say, on that parachute test than we've had in the past, looking at the dynamics of how the parachutes actually come out of the parachute compartment, and computed the margins on those parachutes and have a lot of confidence in that system. So, you know, what we do every day is to try to make sure we haven't missed something. Spaceflight is so complicated. I think we take it one step at a time, looking at all the data. We've closed out all the in-flight anomalies from OFT2 to our satisfaction. And now we're going to go through that flight readiness process. And what that involves is, for example, in the engineering community, the chief engineers are now sitting down with every single one of their disciplines to ask those very questions. Have we missed something? Are you worried about something? Do you think there's an area we need to do a little bit more work in? And so that's happening right now leading up to our program FR, which will be about mid-April. So, and I'll see if Mark has anything to add.
Yeah, I would add that we have very robust processes, and the certificate of readiness process that we use to review everything, the design certification process, they are all very robust. And the proof of that is the fact that the problems that we have caught in the past have been caught as part of that process. Albeit they've been caught late, they were caught. And so that's the important thing, is that we catch it on the ground and we fix it for flight. The OFT2, we went through this same process and we had an exceptionally successful mission. And we're going to have the same success with CFT, because now, again, we've added the crew portion of that, and that's the new things that have been gone through the certification process since OFT2.
Aviation Week for Mark. What's the status of the valve redesign, and are there any other upgrades planned between CFT and Starliner 1?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to the oxidizer valves that we had the problem on OFT2 first attempt. That design is in work, and we expect to have it for Starliner 2. We have an effective mitigation in place with the purge system that we're using to keep the moisture out, as well as the fact that we've sealed up some of the areas on the connectors that we believe were the access for moisture getting into that valve. So we have perfectly acceptable mitigation in place, and we'll have new valves for Starliner 2.
And then some of the other upgrades, I would say, for Starliner 1, you know, in terms of docking, we're going to dock on CFT to the forward port of Harmony. We'll have no-2 zenith capability as well on that flight. So there's a pretty big set of flight software changes to be able to fly to either port. And then Starliner can actually relocate between ports as well, just like Dragon can do. So those are upgrades coming for Starliner 1. And we use the same playbook, I would say, right, from Dragon. Demo 2 could only dock to the forward port, but then Crew 1, we had the capability to dock to either port. So that's a big set of software changes that are in work for Starliner 1.
We are going to take a question from our phone bridge from Jeff Faust with Space News.
Good morning. Question for Steve Stich. I think you're talking about getting certification for Starliner 1 done around November. How late could that slip and you'd still be able to keep Starliner 1 on schedule for launch early next year? If, for example, if anything comes up during this test flight that requires some additional work. Thanks.
Yeah, I think right now we're on a good path to have certification wrapped up by November, December of this calendar year. It kind of needs to happen in about that time frame to hit the spring slot, I would say. We'll have to go look at the data from the flight to see if anything would open certification products. Essentially, the way it works is we'll have an interim human rating certification for CFT, and then the final one at the end of the year, and then we'll just look at the flight performance to see if there's any major items that we need to open for Starliner 1. We know what that cert work is. We know how many requirements we need to close out. In fact, we've already closed on our side, on the commercial crew side, about 17 requirements for Starliner 1. And we know what that other work is in terms of the hazard report changes and so forth. So I think we have a good shot. We just need to stay on track, right, with all the deliveries and our closure plan as well. So.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question is from Chris Davenport with the Washington Post.
Hi, good morning. Thanks. This is for Steve and maybe Mark, if he wants to jump in. It's a follow-up to Bill Harwood's question a moment ago. Steve, you had said that Boeing chose not to use NASA, or chose to use NASA flight operations to fly the vehicle. So I just want to clarify, does that mean NASA and not Boeing is operating Starliner throughout the mission? I'm just wondering, has that always been the plan, or is this a change? Because it seemed to me during the OFT missions that Boeing was still very much in charge. I'm just wondering what the roles are and how that, again, compares to how SpaceX flies Dragon. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is Mark. Boeing is still responsible for the mission. We buy the service from NASA with mission operations, and so the mission management team is led by a Boeing flight director, Laura Kane, and we maintain control for the mission all the way through landing until we get the vehicle back.
And I would say the way the NASA team operates relative to the flight control team that are in the flight control room is that team reports up through Mark, essentially, right? So Mark, think of him almost like a subcontractor, if you will. Boeing chose the NASA flight ops team to do that service, that part of the mission. And so in the FRR process, that team that trained the crew, that build the procedures, that operate the vehicle on the consoles, reports up through Mark for flight readiness. And he has already been looking, when he had his flight readiness review last week, they also reported up through Mark. The mission management team, as Mark said, is chaired by Leroy Kane, and Boeing, we want Boeing to be responsible for the flight. And it's worked pretty well for the previous 2 test flights. I think that construct has worked fine. I don't really see any challenges relative to having the crew on board for this flight, and we understand this construct really well.
I'm going to take one more phone bridge question, and then we'll come back in the room, okay? So next up is Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, hi, I have a question for Mr. Nappi. How difficult has it been for Boeing, frustrating if you will, to be on the sidelines as SpaceX has delivered crew after crew for the past 4 years? And was there ever a point in all of this that Boeing considered even slightly about buying out? Thanks.
We've been very focused on the mission. I'm in the C3PF, which is our processing facility at the Space Center and Kennedy Space Center, and then I come out to Houston, and our teams are really focused on getting ready for previously OFT2 and now CFT. We're on the sidelines. We cheer for SpaceX. That's something that is very important to our country and very important to NASA to have that access, and we're looking forward to providing that as well. So I don't call it frustrating at all. I think we would like to have been further along at this time. There's no doubt about that. But we're here now, and we're prepared, and we're ready to fly.
Thank you. We'll go to a question here in the room. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, thank you. Mark Perot with Aviation Week and Space Technology. How many Starliners do you envision assembling, and how many flights can each one do as you envision it?
Okay, so we're on contract to fly through Starliner 6 with NASA. The first 3 have been ATP'd, so they're in process of being built. The last 3, we've ordered parts, and we have nearly all of that in stock, and we'll be looking at the authority to proceed with those probably this summer, and then we'll focus on those. We have launch vehicles as well for those 6 flights, and so we are in the process of getting ahead. Like I said earlier, we're working on Starliner 2 already.
Our next question in the room, right back there.
Stephen Clark, Ars Technica for Steve Stich. You mentioned the parachutes, still working the certification for that. What are the other items that you're still working final certification and human rating on?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, as I said, parachutes, it's really getting all the data and reviewing it. We have all the data. I suspect that will close in the next couple of weeks. And then the other item that we're going through in detail is what we call the abort certification. So we set some pretty stringent standards for these vehicles to have a ability to board off the launch vehicle should it have a problem during ascent. We said we wanted in 10-second slices of time all the way up through the ascent profile. We wanted to see 95% success rate in an analytical study of various failure cases. And so we're in the final stages of closing that out with Boeing. They've delivered all the data to us. We have a little bit of independent analysis to go do, to work through. And then those are the two, I would say, biggest things that we're working through. And then other than that, it's primarily the final hazard report process closures. Those usually lag behind the analysis. And so we're in really good shape. We're, like I said, we only have really 3 verifications to close and about 5 small aspects of some hazard reports. So we're in good shape.
I'm going to take another question from the phone bridge. This is from Tariq Malik with Space.com.
Hello, thank you very much. I have a question, I believe, for Mark. You mentioned that all of the objectives, since this is your first test flight with a crew on board, and if memory serves, life support wasn't a core testing target from OFT2. And I'm just curious how the development of the life support system for Starliner has gone. What sort of testing has given you confidence, that it's ready for this flight, and what you hope to see or check, from either thermal control or other life support for this mission throughout the different phases that will give you confidence for Starliner 1. Thank you.
Okay. So on OFT2, we did have in our thermal control system, we had some icing in one of the loops, and it really was probably stemmed more from not having crew on board. We managed that problem and then made some changes during this last flow to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so what we'll be focused on for this next flight is how the environment is controlled during the mission with crew in the vehicle. So there'll be obviously more heat generated inside the vehicle. How does the vehicle respond to that? How does the cooling system work? How do the humidity levels stay constant? Those are the types of things that we'll be looking for to make sure that it's a comfortable environment.
And we did have an integrated test with the crew. Trying to remember exactly when it was, but Butch and Sonny got in the vehicle, in the C-3PF, in the processing facility, in their suits with the ECLS system, and we put it through its paces a little bit. So that gave us a lot of good data and confidence that the ECLS system will perform as we need to with Sonny and Butch on board.
Our next question is from Lauren Grush with Bloomberg.
My question, I think this is for Mark. I'm wondering if you could provide an update on any plans for flying Starliner beyond NASA missions. And if you do plan to do purely commercial missions, how will those flights work if the company is, buying flight operation services from NASA? Thanks.
So right now we're focused on the 6 missions that we have on contract with NASA. The private astronaut missions are of an interest later in the decade, but right now, the focus is on getting certified, getting CFT flown safely, getting certified, and then flying that Starliner 1 mission. Once we get past that milestone, I think we may start looking at some of the private astronaut missions, but for now, that is the focus.
Our next question will be here in the room.
Hi, yes, Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now. Thank you all for taking the time to talk with us today. Question for Mark, if I may. You mentioned that Butch and Sonny will be taking the stick at a couple of different points in the mission. Can you describe how dynamic those points will be and was there ever a discussion of possibly looking at a manual docking just to make sure that if that capability was needed, that they could perform that? Thanks.
I'll let Steve help here as well, but there was a lot of discussion about taking the stick and how much control we were going to have. Obviously, the astronauts would like to fly as much as possible. We have these flight test objectives that we have in place that I talked about earlier, and then we also have these operational checkout capabilities that we have planned in the flow as well to provide some stick time for Sonny and Butch to be able to check out how the vehicle works. We're actually going to go into a backup mode. We have a backup mode capability to fly. We're going to go into that backup mode and let them take control over the vehicle. But it is really, slight maneuvers just to get the feel to make sure that it operates properly and operates like they've experienced in their training. Steve, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say we looked at different phases of flight. For example, while they're on orbit, in the rendezvous, quite a ways away from station, they'll go maneuver the vehicle manually to point solar rays at the sun, point the star tracker, try to take star measurements to align the inertial navigation system, and then during the approach they'll do. I can't remember the exact range, but out pretty far on the V-bar, they'll do some manual flying. And the vehicle, it has great flying cues. I've been in the simulator and flown it a number of times myself, and you can manually dock this vehicle, although that's not the prime mode. The prime mode really is to fly in the automated mode with the Vesta rendezvous sensor system. But we're going to test a couple of these different kind of things during the flight, take a look at the data, see how the vehicle responds. Obviously, it flies really well in the simulator. If anybody got to fly it yesterday, Starliner flies beautifully in the simulator, and I suspect it'll do the same thing on orbit.
We have another question here in the room.
Yusuke Tomiyama, the Yomiuri Shimbun, Japanese Daily. My question is to anyone who can answer. Partly, Administrator Nelson mentioned in his first remark, but let me clear that point. So, what is the importance that NASA will have two spacecrafts, not just one? And can we say NASA is now completely recovering from the setback for 9 years since 2011 with no spacecraft carry U.S. astronauts to the ISS? And are you sure? So now you are entering a new golden age for space human exploration?
Let me take the first part of that. Let me speak a little bit more in a little more detail about why it's really important to us to have dissimilar capability or different launch vehicles from a station standpoint. I mentioned previously that Space Station is designed to be continuously crewed. And what I mean by that is our life support systems, for example, are really designed to work with constant throughput. There are water, urine recovery systems, et cetera, and they don't go dormant well. We have a lot of problems with dormancy. And so some of the vehicle systems do better with crew on board. The other thing, because we are designed to have crew on board, we have a lot of things the crew does for us in terms of preventative and corrective maintenance to keep the systems going. When you look at the types of things that we have experienced or could experience, there are any number of different failures or anomalies. The Soyuz coolant leak is a great example where we had a problem on one type of spacecraft and we were able to leverage contingency capability, in this case with Crew Dragon. And so contingencies can occur like that, and having dissimilar capabilities gives you the opportunity, whether it's for crew rescue on board with a dissimilar type vehicle or opportunities around the corner for launching another vehicle. You know, today, all of our Crew Dragons are launching on F9s, and so if there was a problem with F9, for example, and we had to stand down for a while to understand the problem, if we had another vehicle, we could continue flying that vehicle. So that's the reason when we talk about having multiple providers, why it's so important for us to have that continual capability. And I'm not sure I caught everything in the second part of your question.
Okay, we'll go back to the phone bridge here. Our next question is from Marcia Smith with spacepolicyonline.com.
Thanks so much for taking my question. I think it's to Mark, but may also be to Steve. I'm interested in the FAA's involvement in licensing these launches? My understanding is these first 2 test flights are under NASA's authority, and I'd just like to confirm that. But does that mean the other 4 will require FAA licenses? And what is the process right now to get the FAA up to speed if they're going to be licensing the other 4?
Anything to add? The crewed flight test is a NASA test flight, so it's not an FAA licensed flight. So that means that NASA is intimately involved in all aspects of the flight, including working with the range and public safety for the flight. So it's a NASA test flight. After that, we start with, for Starliner 1 and subsequent flights, those then move over to the FAA licensed missions. And I know Mark and his team have been submitting the required data already for Starliner 1 to the FAA to look at that application for launch and entry licenses. And eventually the FAA, after the crewed flight test, will approve that package and then give Boeing the license to go fly Starliner 1. I don't know if Mark has anything to add.
Yeah, like Steve said, we've been working closely with the FAA. We have the licensing application that's been filled out. We just wrapped that up in the January timeframe. And then long term, we're also working with the FAA on understanding what the future requirements may be so that we're well prepared. So we're in good shape for after these initial NASA missions.
Thank you. And it looks like we do have another question here in the room right there.
Thank you. Jackie Goddard for the Times of London. Steve, I wondered if you could speak on a personal note about the enormity and the significance of what you're standing on the cusp of doing. You're about to send friends and colleagues to space on this debut Spaceliner. I wondered if you could talk about the personal weight of that. And for Mark, if I may, the Boeing brand obviously has taken a lot of hits in the last few years over its safety culture. On the aerospace side, I wondered if you could talk a little more about the robustness that you mentioned of the new processes and of what the conversations with the astronauts have been like to put and everybody to put their minds at rest that Boeing safety culture and the questions around it do not extend into this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start and then Mark can add. And you know, it always, when you're putting your friends on a vehicle for the first time, it is a challenge. I've been thinking about that a lot with Butch and Sonny and reflecting back on what it was like 4 years ago when we put Bob and Doug on Dragon for the first time. And I personally look inside at what have we done? Have we done everything that we can? And the struggle always is, spaceflight is a challenge. It's inherently, it's a risky business. And what I'll be doing is looking to make sure that we've done everything that we can to make sure that flight's safe, and we do that every single day. We've been doing that for the 8 years I've been in the program, even before that. But it is a big challenge when you say, hey, our team, the Boeing NASA team, has done everything that's possible to make the flight safe, and Butch and Sonny, I'll get to talk to them later today. So you're going to be good to go, and we'll see you when you get back. That's the thing I always want to say is, hey, we'll see you when you get back, and say it with confidence because that's the truth. And in terms of the safety process that I know Mark will answer, but you know, NASA's been side by side with Boeing, a little different than the aircraft. I say we have inspection points on the vehicle to where the tape remediation that Mark talked about, removing over a mile of tape, we had people side by side inspecting the tape, inspecting the wiring after the tape was removed, making sure that was done properly. Same thing with parachutes. So the process is a little different than aviation, where I would say NASA's more side by side. We're talking 2 spacecraft that are going to fly on multiple missions. And so a lot of individual care and feeding goes into every single one of those spacecraft, and NASA's side by side with Boeing. And I'll see what Mark has to say.
Yes, I joined Boeing in 2015, and I was on the SLS program, Space Launch System program, and from the moment I walked in the door, safety and quality were always #1 priority, and that hasn't changed. My experience has been in human spaceflight for almost my entire career, And I can tell you that our process in human spaceflight is very robust. We design around redundancy. Everything that's critical has some level of redundancy in it so that if something fails, we have a backup system to go to. We test, and test to make sure that all the components, all the integrated systems, and everything work together. When we do things on the floor, we have critical inspection points where Boeing inspectors come in and look at it, and as Steve said, NASA will do audits as well of those systems. And then if something should snake its way through the system, we do integrated testing of the vehicle to make sure that it's ready to go. The test team that launches the vehicle and supports the flights, the in-flight mission operations, they are trained in case something goes wrong to recover from that problem. So it's a very robust system. We do independent reviews to make sure that we've covered all the bases. It's a very robust system. It's worked well for us in the past, and it really hasn't changed on this program from my experience in the nearly 40 years in human spaceflight.
If I could just add one item, just as a reminder, Boeing designed and built the vast majority of the space station itself. They are our primary sustainer, and they're responsible for safety of all the equipment they built, plus integrated safety across our entire spacecraft. And so the processes that we're talking about that we use together for human spaceflight have been around. You know, we've had the vehicle now for 25 years, crewed for 23 years, and so we do have a very different integrated, I think, approach in the aerospace human spaceflight side that's pretty unique. So just want to remind folks that this is not Boeing's first time to deal with human spaceflight safety.
Thank you all, and that is going to be all the time we have today for questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted your questions and to our briefers for taking time out of their busy schedules to answer them. We do have 2 more briefings today to cover Starliner. The next up will be at 11:30 a.m. Eastern and will be the Mission Overview News Conference, and then at 2 p.m. you'll have the chance to hear from the crew of Starliner themselves. We do hope you'll stick around for both of those briefings, but for now, that will do it for us here. Thank you again for joining us.